They brought Clint Eastwood onto Jimmy Kimmel's show, expecting some laughs, a few viral moments, maybe a cowboy joke or two, but what they got was a man ready to shake things up. The studio was buzzing, lights blazing, cameras rolling, the crowd cheering like it was just another night. But the moment Clint walked out, the energy shifted. He didn't wave or smile. He moved with the confidence of someone who had nothing to prove and zero patience for nonsense. Jimmy greeted him with a wide grin and an outstretched hand. Clint shook it once, firm, cold, and then sat down, unyielding. The cheers faded, but the tension lingered, heavy and unspoken. You could feel it. Something was off. Something was brewing. Jimmy tried to lighten the mood, cracking jokes about Clint's age and cowboy legacy. The audience laughed on cue. Clint didn't. His eyes locked onto Jimmy like he was deciding whether to end this before it even began. One wrong word. That's all it would take. And Jimmy said the wrong word. Leaning back, trying to stay cool, he flashed that late-night grin and asked, "Do you still ride horses or just yell at them now?" The crowd laughed, but it was thin, nervous, almost forced. Clint didn't flinch, didn't blink. Finally, he slowly turned to Jimmy and said, voice like gravel, "When it matters." 4 words. But the way he said it felt like a bullet through the joke. Jimmy laughed louder than he needed to, scrambling to recover. "You know, folks, back in the day, Clint got into a bar fight during filming and—" "Didn't happen, Clint. Cut in. Clean, cold." The room fell dead silent. Jimmy paused, still clinging to his fake smile like a man holding a lit firecracker. He thought he could steer the situation back, but instead, he reached under the desk, pulled out a dusty cowboy hat, a prop, and held it up for the crowd. The audience clapped, expecting Clint to laugh, maybe toss it on for a quick gag. "Come on, Clint," Jimmy grinned. "Just one for the fans, huh?" That's when it happened. Clint didn't shout or raise a hand. He just stared, a long, hard look. Then he said it. "Put that away." Not a suggestion, a command. The studio fell completely silent. You could hear the cameras humming. Jimmy's grin froze, realizing he was locked in a cage with a lion. Offstage, Maggie stood with her arms folded, lips tight, whispering to the stage manager, "Told you not to push him." But it was too late. Jimmy tried to laugh it off, setting the hat aside. Okay, no hats tonight," he said, his voice cracking just a little. Desperate to steer it back, he pivoted. "So tell us about the movie. What inspired this character?" Clint leaned forward, but instead of answering, he locked eyes with Jimmy. "You know what I've learned," he said slowly. "People will do anything. For a laugh, even turn something real into a circus." The audience shifted, unsure whether to clap or hold their breath. Jimmy chuckled weakly. "Well, we're just having fun, right?" Clint didn't blink. "You call this fun?" His voice dropped lower. "You bring me here, make me a punchline, what, to keep the lights on?" The crowd gasped. Some clapped, others went silent. The air felt thick, tense. Jimmy was officially out of control. He grabbed a card, trying to change the subject, but Clint wasn't done. "You wanted the legend," Clint said, his voice sharp, "but you weren't ready for the man." Then Clint sat back, silent and unmoving, and for the first time that night Jimmy Kimmel had nothing to say. Jimmy shuffled his cards like a nervous gambler, holding nothing of value. He forced a chuckle, nodding toward the audience as if they were supposed to save him. "Come on, folks, let's give it up for Clint Eastwood," he shouted. Scattered claps, a few awkward cheers, but most people just sat there, frozen, unsure if they were watching a talk show or witnessing a slow-motion collapse. Clint didn't react. He just stared, not at Jimmy, but at the bright lights, the cameras, the set. His jaw clenched, his eyes scanning the studio like it was all some big joke he never agreed to be part of. Jimmy leaned forward, trying again. "So, directing this one must have been a challenge, huh?" Clint turned his head slowly. "You think that's what this is about?" he asked. He wasn't yelling. He didn't need to. His voice sliced through the air like a razor. "It's not about camera angles and budgets," he said. "It's about the work, the truth, the kind of story that doesn't fit in a 30-second clip between punchlines." The crowd stirred again. A few clapped, some whispered, and one voice shouted from the back, "Tell him, Clint!" Jimmy smiled, his teeth clenched behind it. Hey, it's late-night TV. People want to laugh, he said, trying to steer the mood. Clint's stare sharpened. No, he said. They want honesty. They just don't get it anymore. Jimmy tried to hold his ground, gesturing to the crowd like it was a lifeline. They love you, man. We all do. They just want to see the legend. That's all this is. Clint leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his voice low and dangerous. They don't want a clown, he said. They want the truth, and you came here with a script. The room broke again, gasps, some claps. A woman near the front stood up and shouted, "Respect the legend." Jimmy sat back, clearly rattled now, his rhythm and charm gone. This wasn't a talk show anymore, this was a courtroom, and he was losing the argument. He tried a different angle. So, Clint, your performance in this film, really powerful stuff. Was it personal for you? Clint didn't blink. You ever had something taken from you? He asked. Something that mattered. Jimmy hesitated. Well, yeah. Then you know, Clint said, cutting him off. This character wasn't written. He was remembered. Jimmy nodded, fake smile reloaded. Powerful stuff. Very deep. He quickly shifted gears. So, any funny moments from the set? That's when it snapped. Clint sat back slowly, staring at Jimmy as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Funny, he said, the word dripping with disgust. You think everything has to be funny. Everything has to trend. Everything has to be safe. Jimmy fell, silent. You want the old man to ride in, say something charming, wear a hat, maybe trip over his words for a laugh. Clint shook his head. I'm not here for your ratings. I'm here because the story matters. And if you can't respect that, then maybe you're the joke. Boom. The audience erupted, half cheering, half frozen. Some pulled out their phones, others too stunned to move. Backstage, producers were panicking. The director was shouting into his headset, "Cut to break, cut to break." But the cameras kept rolling. The chaos was gold, and the network wanted every second of it. Jimmy swallowed hard, trying to salvage what was left. We're just trying to entertain, Clint. Clint looked at him like he had just heard the dumbest thing ever spoken on television. This isn't entertainment, Clint said, his voice firm. This is distraction dressed up as comedy, and I'm not your costume. Jimmy sat still. No comebacks, no jokes, just sweat forming at his hairline and a growing look of regret in his eyes. Clint leaned back, arms crossed, saying nothing more. But the silence said everything. It was suffocating. Jimmy glanced off camera, his eyes darting to the floor producer, desperate for a lifeline. But no cue cards, no earpiece, no audience laughter could save him now. This wasn't a talk show anymore. This was a reckoning. He leaned forward, trying once more, his voice thin and cracked. Clint, maybe we just got off on the wrong foot. Clint didn't move. Jimmy pushed on, forcing a smile like a man whistling, past a graveyard. Let's just talk about the movie, the cast, the cinematography, whatever you want. Clint's voice came slow, heavy, final. You had your chance. That was it. 5 words, but they landed like a gavel. The crowd stirred again, this time louder. Some clapped, others stood up. One man in the back shouted, "Let him talk!" Another voice responded, "Kick him off!" The room split down the middle. Jimmy's smile cracked like glass. He looked out over the chaos, then back at Clint. "Come on," he said, his tone sharpening. "This is my show and you're my guest." Clint raised his eyes and something in them made even the camera operators flinch. "I'm not your guest," he said. "I'm your mirror." The audience gasped. Jimmy blinked, trying to process what that meant, but Clint wasn't waiting. "You bring people on here to perform," Clint continued. "To sell, to play dumb, to amuse. You think this place matters because the lights are bright and the seats are full?" He leaned in, his voice like iron. "This place is a machine, and you're just a gear trying to stay shiny." Jimmy's jaw clenched. He was losing the moment, losing the crowd, and he knew it. He stood, something he never did. But this wasn't about the show anymore. This was personal now. "Now you come on here, act like you're above all of this," Jimmy snapped. "But you agreed to be here. You showed up. So what are you really trying to prove?" Clint slowly rose from his seat. The air shifted. The room felt smaller, hotter, tighter. He stood tall, his face calm, his voice steady. So I came here, Clint said, because I thought this show still meant something, because people at home still cared about real stories. He took a step closer. But now I see they just tuned in to watch another puppet dance. And I don't dance. The audience exploded, half on their feet, screaming his name, others booing, shouting over each other. Phones were everywhere. This moment, live, raw, real, was already being clipped, uploaded, shared. Jimmy stepped back, arms out, trying to control the chaos. "Let's just calm down," he yelled. "We're trying to entertain." But Clint didn't stop. "You don't get to hide behind that word anymore," he said. "Entertainment doesn't mean anything when it's hollow." Jimmy turned to the crowd. "Come on, this is supposed to be fun." Clint looked at the audience, not angry, not loud, just real. "You want fun?" he asked. "Go watch reruns." And then he dropped the line that shattered the whole damn place. "I came here to talk about a film that matters. You brought a hat." Boom. The crowd lost it, clapping, screaming, yelling, some cheering for Clint, others demanding he leave. Jimmy stood frozen, caught in the eye of the storm he couldn't control. Backstage, the producers were in meltdown. The director was screaming into the headset, "Do we cut? Do we cut?" The network hesitated. Ratings were through the roof, but the show was disintegrating. Clint stood center stage, unmoving, unshaken, like a statue of defiance in a crumbling empire of laughs. Jimmy opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. He tried to breathe, tried to smile, tried to summon the charm that had carried him through years of celebrity interviews, hot takes and viral gags. But it wasn't working. Clint Eastwood stood across from him like a wall, unmovable, not shouting, not flailing, just staring with a calm so cold it was terrifying. The crowd was unhinged now, one side chanting, "Clint, Clint, Clint," and the other yelling, "Sit down!" Security stood by the stage, frozen, because who the hell wanted to be the one to lay hands on Clint Eastwood? Maggie was off stage, lips tight, watching everything unravel exactly how she'd predicted. She leaned toward a producer, voice sharp. "He gave you a warning, you laughed on stage." Jimmy raised his hands like he was conducting an orchestra of chaos. "Look," he snapped, trying to grab control of the room. "We invited Clint on because we respect him, because we—" "No," Clint interrupted, his word louder than the crowd. He stepped forward, slow and deliberate, every eye in the room on him. "You invited me on," he said, "because you thought you could use me." Jimmy's face flushed. "That's not true," he stammered. Clint raised a hand, silencing him. "You wanted a clip," Clint continued. "A moment, something that would rack up views by morning." He looked around the studio, the lights, the crew, the cameras. "You didn't care what I had to say. You just wanted a meme in boots." Jimmy's fist clenched at his sides, his voice dropped, bitter now. "Well, congratulations," he said. "You've hijacked my show. You happy?" Clint stared for a moment before saying something no one expected. "This isn't your show." The crowd gasped. "This set, these lights, this desk, it's rented power," Clint said. "The moment they cut the cameras, it's gone. It belongs to the next guy who walks out with a grin and a script." Jimmy stepped back, as if slapped. "You think this matters?" Clint asked, his eyes boring through him. "This little machine," Clint said, "it chews up people with something to say and spits out punchlines." The crowd roared again, screams, claps, boos, phones in the air. It was chaos. Pure, unscripted, unstoppable. Jimmy turned to the audience, his voice cracking, desperate now. "Guys, we just wanted to do a fun segment. That's it. This isn't supposed to be a war." Clint shook his head. "That's the problem. You think the truth is war." Maggie stepped toward the stage, but Clint held up a hand. He wasn't done. "You said you respected me," Clint said, "but real respect isn't shown with applause. It's shown by shutting up and listening." The crowd went dead silent. Jimmy didn't know what to say. His mouth opened and closed, looking around like he was trying to find the script, but there wasn't one anymore. This wasn't his show, not tonight. Then Clint dropped the last grenade. "I've been doing this longer than you've been alive," he said, calm but loaded. "I've seen what happens when people trade integrity for views. It's not a trade, it's a funeral." The silence afterward wasn't awkward. It was heavy, like truth had walked in and choked the oxygen out of the air. Finally, Jimmy stood tall, trying to hold on to whatever was left. "Well," he said, voice shaking, "I think we're done here." Clint didn't flinch. "Finally," he said, and without another word he turned and walked off stage. No band, no music, no camera cut, just the sound of a legend leaving a burning building behind. The audience stood, some cheering, some stunned. Jimmy was left standing alone, hands on his desk, eyes empty. No jokes, no applause, just fallout. The moment Clint disappeared behind the curtain, the studio collapsed into noise. The audience, now on their feet, shouted over one another, half electrified, the other half confused, maybe even angry. Security didn't know what to do. The band just stared at their instruments, hands frozen mid-motion. No music played. There was nothing left to cover it up. Jimmy stood center stage, still, his hand resting on the desk like it was the only thing keeping him upright. The smile was gone. The mask had cracked. His show, his control, had just been torn apart in front of millions. The cameras kept rolling. The floor director waved frantically, mouthing, "Cut, cut!" But the booth hesitated. They'd never seen numbers like this. Viewership was spiking by the second. Social media was already flooding with clips, hashtags, and split-screen reactions. Eastwood uncensored, Kimmel destroyed, live meltdown. Maggie stormed down the hallway backstage, following Clint's trail, like a soldier returning from battle. She passed shell-shocked interns, stunned PAs, and two producers screaming into headsets, trying to figure out who approved the hat prop. No one answered. They were too busy watching the monitors, still glued to Clint. He was in the green room now, calm and silent, sipping his coffee like nothing had happened. Maggie walked in, crossed her arms, and said what no one else had the guts to. "You ended his show." Clint didn't look at her, just nodded once, then whispered, "It was already ending, I just gave it a reason." Back on stage, Jimmy tried to recover. "Wow, that was intense, huh?" he said to the audience, chuckling, his voice dry and his face pale. But no one laughed. They weren't with him anymore. They were somewhere else, with Clint. He glanced at the next guest chair, empty. The rising pop star who was supposed to appear had already slipped out the back door. The producers were in chaos, debating whether to go to commercial, run a rerun, or cut the feed entirely. But the damage was done. This wasn't just a rough night, it was a rupture. YouTube lit up like wildfire. Clips with titles like "Clint Eastwood destroys Jimmy Kimmel Live" and "Legend goes nuclear on late night" were already trending. Millions of views, thousands of comments. The internet had chosen sides, and Jimmy, he wasn't on the right one. Backstage, Maggie stood by Clint's side as he pulled on his coat. "For you sure you're done?" she asked. Clint finally turned to her. "No," he said, "I'm just getting started." Then he walked out, down the corridor, through the side door and into the night. No bodyguards, no fanfare, just a shadow disappearing. Into the city, leaving behind a studio still trying to figure out what the hell just happened. Inside, Jimmy sat alone at his desk. The applause sign blinked, but no one clapped. The house lights dimmed, and in that cold, humming silence, one thing was clear. The show might still be on, but Jimmy Kimmel wasn't in charge anymore. The next morning, the world had changed. News outlets scrambled to catch up. CNN called it the most unexpected on-air confrontation in late-night history. Fox ran the headline, "Eastwood goes rogue live." Even Variety, usually soaked in PR sugar, dropped the filter. Kimmel humiliated as Clint Eastwood hijacks live segment and walks. Clips dominated YouTube's trending page. Memes flooded Twitter. On TikTok, a war-zone split-screen debate stitch after stitch. One half calling Clint a washed-up relic, the other hailing him as a legend. The other half called him the last real man in Hollywood. But the numbers didn't. Clint Eastwood broke the internet without raising his voice. Clint was right, respect. Kimmel's show was over. Jimmy tried to play it off, posting a clip with a watered-down caption. "One hell of a night with the great Clint Eastwood, always unpredictable." But nobody bought it, because everyone saw the truth, live, unfiltered. Inside the ABC offices, the mood was panic in a suit. Executives yelled across conference tables, demanding to know why it wasn't cut sooner. The legal team debated if Clint breached the contract. But what clause do you cite when the guest simply refuses to play pretend? Behind the scenes, Guests began pulling out. 3 cancelled that week alone. Sponsors sent nervous emails. One line echoed through every meeting room. Is the show still safe? But this wasn't just about Jimmy. This was about late night itself. People started asking bigger questions. When did talk shows become noise machines? When did real conversations vanish beneath clapping signs and viral bait? Why was it that the only person who told the truth had to walk off the stage to be heard? And as the dust settled, one image stood above the rest. Clint Eastwood, silent, composed, walking off set with every eye on him and no one able to stop him. Back at his ranch, Clint didn't speak to the press, didn't post a statement, didn't tweet. He didn't need to. The silence spoke loud enough. Maggie handed him a phone with the latest headlines. He glanced at it once, then set it down beside a stack of scripts, new stories, real ones, the kind that didn't need jokes to mean something. You. Sure you're ready for the storm? She asked him. Clint just looked out over the hills and said, It's already here. And he smiled, not for the cameras, but because, for the first time in years, the world finally listened.